Okay, welcome back. Everybody make it back from the break okay? Anybody come up with any profound questions or any basic questions? Doesn't really matter. Any questions at all while you're taking a bit to let it all sink in? All right, no questions at the moment. Feel free to ask at any point and feel free to interrupt. So we're going to look then at the additional views. So we've so far been only looking at the map view. We're going to look at we're going to start with looking at the profile viewer. And the profile viewer is going to use our, we're going to access this from the viewer integration toolbar. And the viewer integration toolbar is this one here. I've got docked off. I typically have it docked off to my right-hand side of the map display. The first button is a simple toggle that turns on and off the profile view. It doesn't, it just turns it on from wherever it was previously. There's no setting it. I normally will turn it on by drawing a profile line in. And a profile, you could draw a few different methods. One way is you always start by clicking where you want to start the profile and where you want to finish the profile. And then you specify a depth for the profile. The wider the profile, the more data points will be incorporated in, the longer it will take to display. And it just depends on what you're trying to look at. Sometimes a wide profile is useful. Most times a narrow profile is useful. And when you left click or data to accept that, then it will open up the profile view and display the data points. It is displaying the points in the profile based on my active LAS layer. So if I have more than one LAS layer, then I will only see what's in the active LAS layer. There are some other ways of drawing that profile. One is when you draw the start and end of the profile. If you right click, then we can specify the depth. And so often if we're trying to do a narrow profile, then it is handy to specify. Maybe I'll use a 1 meter depth because it's a lot easier to specify the depth than it is to try to adjust your cursor for it. The depth can also be changed in the profile view itself. So across the top of the profile are tools that are directly associated with the profile view. So we can change the depth using this box that has various red arrows on it. That allows you to change it. You can make your depth a little bit thicker or a little bit thinner. Those are your various options. There's a little trick, a little Easter egg, that if you are wanting to draw similar profiles, then if you start and end, you have to specify it. But if instead you start and double click the end, then the profile depth will be set at the same depth that you last used. So that could be quite handy. Nice when you're looking at profiles, often to take thin profiles that are in relationship to the nominal pulse spacing. That gives you a thin view of the data. And if you see typically if you see smooth, that's a good indication of ground. If you see a lot of elevation variation within a thin profile, that's a good indication of vegetation. And indicators, not a be all end all, but a good indication. So again, the profile, we have to always specify the start and the end, and then some depth. If we right click, we can specify the depth, or if we double click the endpoint, it uses the last depth for that profile. If I put my cursor in the profile view, then you'll see this perpendicular line that gets displayed on the profile line. The profile line is displayed because of, in the viewer integration toolbar, there's a draw profile box in 2D view and a draw profile center line in 2D view. It looks like a line because I have drawn a fairly thin. If I zoom in, you'll see there's the box, and you can control whether the box exists or whether there's just, or whether the profile line is displayed. That's the center of your profile view. Right? So you have some different options for what you want to look at in the 2D or the map view. If I'm in the profile view and I move my cursor, then you'll see that that perpendicular line to the profile is showing me where in the profile I am. So you can see that because I drew it from the west to the east, then my profile is also showing from west to east. If you draw it the opposite way, then you'll see that the start is wherever I put the start. So now we're looking at it, basically looking at it southbound. You have control over how you view things based on how you draw that profile. If I, let me make the profile a little bit, dialog a little bit larger. And if I scroll my mouse wheel in the profile, then it moves the profile forward. And in this case, because I drew it from east to west, then forward is south. And if I scroll the mouse wheel backwards, then I scroll north, right? I'm scrolling backwards in the view. Just like in the map view, the default attribute coloration in the profile view is done as elevation. So there is a legend, a display legend, just the same, where we can display by elevation, we can display by classification. Right now I can see I've got orange points on the ground, I've got green points in the vegetation. If I draw a profile over one of the buildings that was classified, maybe zoom out a little bit, then you'll see that there. What I usually find is the points in the profile, as I get older, are too thin. And if I turn on the live view display and synchronize just the profile, I can change the point size bigger in just the profile because it's the only view that I have synchronized. So it's the only view that that change is applicable to. Just like in the map, if I change a filter or if I uncheck something in live view, as long as that's the view being synchronized, then my profile, the buildings will disappear, but they remain on in my map view. So if you're careful about what views are synchronized, you can control what you're seeing and how you're symbolizing different features in the different views. So I often will try to uncheck, but the program though will not let me uncheck everything in live view. So I've always got to have something synchronized in there. But that's just the way it is. So if I'm working mainly with my profile, I'll have my profile synchronized. If I'm mainly working with my map view, I'll have my map, etc. If I close out, I'm not going to save those changes. That'll redisplay all the points in my profile. And you'll notice that There is no percentage on the profile view, which means I display all of the points. So it's always 100% of the points that are found inside of the defined box get displayed in this view, which is why you want to be careful if you're taking really big profiles, because it could take a while to load up all the data and display it, and you may even load up so much data that you run out of memory trying to display that much data. There is no draw type in the profile view. We always draw the points. There's no, tin is something we see when we look down on it, so it doesn't make sense to draw the tin itself in the profile. There is another feature of the profile, and that is the vertical scale. So it is often handy if you hold the control key and with your mouse in the profile view, scroll your mouse wheel and notice the vertical scale value. If I scroll forward, I'm scaling the data, the elevation. If I'm scrolling backwards, I'm reducing that scale. This is handy, particularly when you're doing brake line work or when you're trying to look at various things of features in the elevation. You could help modify or scale to make those features stand out better for you. There's a measure tool in the navigation, and that measure tool is intended for measuring things in your map view. There is a similar measure tool in the profile, so I could go in and measure and see that this building, the lowest roof sits roughly 2.5 meters off the ground where it shows the display. It is a cumulative, so if you move your mouse, then it changes based on where that measure distance is. If I hit escape, it stops the measurement. Right? So you can go in here and make various measurements of whatever you want to look at the data. I normally leave the tool as much as I can on the continuous pan and zoom. And you'll notice that there are shortcut keys for several of the tools in the profile. And so if I want to be on continuous pan and zoom, if I do Control D, it automatically enables that tool. And that's the handy one because that allows me to, if I hold my left mouse button and move my mouse, it zooms the profile in and out. And because we're zooming the profile in and out, we're elongating or shrinking the length of the profile. So you'll see that change. If I right click, I can pan. So I can pan along the profile. So it's right clicking and moving my mouse. And you'll see the profile of the map move along with me so I can see where I'm at. So left click, zoom in and out, right click, pan. You'll notice that when I pan, the data automatically recenters. Right? I'm changing the elevation range that I'm in, but it's automatically recentering. And it's doing that because of this button right here, which is to recenter the Z-extent of the profile. So if you want to put the profile at a certain spot, it is good to uncheck that or Control B to turn that off. And then I can pan and I can place the profile wherever I would like it to be. And it won't recenter. That can be handy for different things that you're doing. There is another measure tool, and the other measure tool allows you to measure the area, and that measures the area underneath the line. And above the line, and that's in relationship to the drape So this is the line that you saw pop up when I turn on that tool is the drape line. And that drape line goes down the center of the view. That drape line can also be controlled, or you can toggle it off and on using the Control O or the drape profile line. The drape profile line drapes based off of what's displayed in the view. So it doesn't use, it creates a tin on the fly as it goes, but it doesn't use that same point tin split filtering that we can do in the map view. So it's just whatever you have displayed. So if I want to drape and see what the ground profile looks like, then I would toggle the filter in the profile view to filter to show me just the ground points. If I have live view, if I left live view toggled where it was synchronizing multiple views, if I change the filter here, then it changes it across the different views as well. That's another reason I like to tend to focus the live view on a single view at a time. But that would be our profile line. The profile line, again, is a tri-state button where we can turn it off and on, or we can display it by draping a profile to whatever points are displayed, or draping a profile that's separated by point source ID. So if you're trying to look at the difference of the profiles from one year to the next, and if you had done, as I mentioned earlier, where you modified the point source ID information to correspond to those 2 years, then this would be a good tool to give you a profile line, one for each year, and you'd be able to then go in and measure the differences that you see. So you could go in and measure your change or your erosion that's happening on your beach. The reticules, so these horizontal and vertical lines, they're being displayed because of the where we can turn them off and on with the display reticules. And if you control click, that's the Easter egg to open up the page with the hand on it in the profile, which brings up then the profile properties, much as the same as the page in the hand in the main toolbar brings up the LAS layer properties, right? And you can set that by selecting the number of lines, or you can do something like creating a quick grid where you might say that I want to see, a grid at, 10 centimeters, and then you would enable that in the grid. If you are zoomed out and the value you pick will create so many grid lines that you can't see your display anymore, then it will just turn off the reticules on you until you zoom in to a level that we can display the lines without it making a solid display. I wanted to change that again. It's control click on the tool, brings us directly in there, and say if I change that to a 1 meter grid, and we can apply, see that now the reticules are on a 1 meter grid, so we can see the stationing at a meter and we can see the elevation at a meter. And you have full control over how you want to display that. So if you want something else in there, you've got control over what you're doing there. The contents of the grid can be copied to the clipboard, which means that I can open up a document and it'll display the contents of the grid, but it does not include the reticules. If you do that copy, and our monitors are usually pretty good, so it's just the same. Easy that if I set up my reticules and my grid the way I want it to look, that I could just take and use some sort of capture tool to capture the information of the grid as well. Right? So you have various ways to kind of capture out that graphic. We do not at the moment in LP360 have a way of automatically generating the graphics off of that profile. But we do have a way of automatically generating or draping lines and creating shapes from the drapes. So there's a few different ways to do that. Though the graphic, automatic generation of the graphic is something that is on our development list. There is one other tool. Let me turn off the graticules here, and I'm going to go back and display all points. And maybe I'll just turn my recenter to make sure that that's adjusting for me. One other tool in your profile is to toggle the cursor crosshair. And the cursor crosshair can be a really nice way of seeing whether things align vertically or whether they align horizontally. So whether they're at the same elevation or whether in the vertical, they're at the same horizontal position. This is a kind of a nice way of doing comparisons, making measurements, and if you're placing break lines at elevation or placing points at elevation or making a measurement, this can kind of is a nice way to help see whether things line up from in elevation or in stationing. That's the display cursor crosshair toggle. I toggle that off, it just goes back to just displaying whatever the tool is that I'm on. Okay. So that's the basics of the profile view. Like I said, you have all the different display mechanisms that you have in the map view. So one of the things I'll do here is I mentioned about displaying things by point source ID, or sorry, by return. And if I cut a profile through vegetation, maybe I'll thicken it up a little bit. I'll change the depth. Maybe I'll do a 5-meter depth. And I'm gonna take off the auto Z so I can zoom out a little bit. And I'm going to display in the profile using return number. So you can see return combinations, and those return combinations, then you'll see the first returns here in the cyan. You'll see some other ones get partway through the vegetation, and then you'll see the yellow last returns or the magenta only returns. And so you can see that sometimes your last returns are in the trees. Sometimes you make it through down to the ground and back. Other times you only have returns either at the top of the trees or in the trees. Just that kind of depends on what the situation is. That return numbers can be handy for filtering when we're doing some different classification. So I'll color that by classification. That's the basics on the profile. We'll come back to that in a little bit here. Let's have a look at the 3D viewer. Well, I guess, is there any questions on the profile view or profile window at the moment?